He was the king of Manhattan, a titan of finance with a penthouse overlooking Central Park and a name whispered in awe on Wall Street. He was Jonathan Westwood, and his empire, Westwood Global Holdings, was a testament to his ruthless ambition. She was Olivia Hayes, his adoring wife, the beautiful, intelligent woman who was meant to be the final piece of his perfect dynasty, the mother to his heir. But on the stormy Tuesday, she tearfully, joyfully told him she was pregnant. He didn't give her a kiss. He gave her a check, a non-disclosure agreement, and a one-way ticket out of his life. He called her a liability. He never imagined that the child he abandoned, the life he tried to erase, would be the very catalyst for his spectacular world-shattering downfall. This is the story of how a forgotten wife and an unborn baby brought an emperor to its knees. The air in the penthouse was always the same temperature. A crisp, climate-controlled 68 degrees, a perfect, sterile environment, meticulously managed by a smart home system that cost more than the house Olivia grew up in. From their perch on the 72nd floor of 157 New York City, sprawled below a glittering, chaotic tapestry that felt 1,000,000 miles away. It was Jonathan's kingdom, and she was supposedly his queen. Olivia traced the rim of her water glass, the condensation leaving a temporary ring on the polished marble of the breakfast bar. Outside, a bruised purple twilight settled over Central Park. Jonathan was late, as he often was. His work was his life, his passion, his God. Westwood Global Holdings wasn't just a company. It was an extension of his own ego, a sprawling international conglomerate built on aggressive acquisitions and Jonathan's almost terrifying foresight. He could spot a weakness in a competitor's financials, the way a shark smells blood in the water. She had met him at a gallery opening in Chelsea. She was a junior art curator, passionate and a little starstruck. He was a force of nature, exuding a charisma so potent it felt like a physical force. He'd zeroed in on her, cutting through the crowd of sycophants and socialites, with a singular focus that was both flattering and unnerving. He hadn't just looked at her. He'd seemed to appraise her, to see her potential as an asset. Within 6 months, they were married. Her modest life of dusty archives and wine and cheese openings was replaced by a world of galas, private jets, and the constant low-level hum of immense power. She loved him, or at least she loved the man he was. In the quiet moments, the rare evenings when the titan of industry receded, and she saw a glimpse of the man beneath the one who would hold her hand while they watched old movies, his head in her lap. But those moments were becoming rarer islands in an ever-expanding ocean of business dinners, conference calls and trips to London, Hong Kong, and Dubai that she was often not invited to. Her role, she was beginning to understand, was ornamental. She was to be beautiful, intelligent, impeccably dressed, and a silent testament to his good taste. Tonight was different. Tonight she held a secret that she believed would change everything. It would anchor him, ground him, and transform their gilded cage into a real home. She had taken 3 tests that morning, the 2 pink lines on each stick appearing with an almost defiant speed. She was pregnant. A wave of nausea, which had become her constant companion for the past 2 weeks, roiled in her stomach. She clutched the marble countertop, taking a deep, calming breath. This was good. This was what they needed. A family, an heir to the Westwood Empire. Jonathan had spoken of it in abstract terms, a necessary component of his legacy. Now it was real. The sound of his key in the electronic lock sent a jolt of nervous energy through her. He strode in, shedding his custom-tailored Brioni jacket and tossing it onto a minimalist leather chair. He looked tired, his handsome face etched with the lines of a stressful day. His tie was already loosened, and he bypassed her to pour himself a 2-finger measure of Macallan 25. "Tough day?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. "The board is being difficult about the Kestrel acquisition," he grunted, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "They're risk-averse cowards. They don't see the bigger picture." "You'll convince them?" she said, her standard supportive refrain. "You always do." He gave a slight nod, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. He finally looked at her, his sharp grey eyes scanning her from head to toe. It was that appraising look again. "You look nice. New dress?" "I wore it to the symphony last month," she replied gently. "Jonathan, can we talk?" "I have something to tell you. Something wonderful." His focus was already drifting toward his tablet, which was glowing on the counter. "Can it wait, Liv? I need to review the quarterly projections before the market opens in Tokyo." "No," she said, a new firmness in her voice. "It can't wait." That got his attention. He turned fully toward her, his posture straightening. He disliked being challenged, even in the smallest way. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. She took his free hand, her palm a little sweaty. "Jonathan, we're going to have a baby." She watched his face, searching for the explosion of joy she had envisioned for weeks. She expected him to drop his glass, to lift her into the air, to see the hardened CEO melt away into a proud, expectant father. Instead, his expression went blank. The practiced charm, the corporate warmth, all of it vanished, leaving behind something cold and unnervingly still. He slowly, deliberately set his glass down on the counter. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice low and devoid of any emotion. "I'm pregnant," she repeated, a tremor of fear lacing her words. "We're having a baby." He didn't move. He just stared at her, his eyes like chips of flint. The man she thought she knew was gone, replaced by a stranger. This was the Jonathan Westwood, who liquidated companies and fired hundreds without a second thought. This was the shark. "No," he said, the single word a blade. "We're not." "What do you mean I took 3 tests? I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow to confirm. But I'm sure." "I mean," he said, taking a step back, creating a chasm between them, "that you are pregnant, I am not." He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, a gesture not of distress but of profound irritation, as if she'd just announced the caterers for a major event had cancelled. "This is a complication, Olivia. A serious one." "A complication?" She whispered the word, feeling like a slap. "Jonathan, this is our child." "It's a liability," he corrected her, his voice hardening. "Right now, everything is geared towards the Kestrel merger. It's a $5 billion deal. It requires my undivided attention and absolute financial liquidity. A divorce, a child. The board will see it as a distraction. My partners will see it as a weakness. Victoria Croft will use it as leverage." The name hung in the air. Victoria Croft. The CEO of their biggest rival, a woman as ruthless and brilliant as Jonathan himself. They were in negotiations for a hostile takeover, a deal that would make Westwood Global an untouchable behemoth. Olivia had heard him speak her name with a mixture of hatred and deep, unsettling respect. "Why would you mention a divorce?" Olivia's voice cracked. He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes broke her heart. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was a cold, pragmatic calculation. He was assessing a problem and determining the most efficient solution. "Because this isn't part of the plan," he said flatly. "Our prenup is ironclad, as you know. It accounts for infidelity for irreconcilable differences. It also stipulates a significant bonus upon the birth of a male heir after 5 years of marriage. We are at 3 years and 4 months. You have acted outside the established parameters." She felt the blood drain from her face. "Parameters, Jonathan. This is our life, not a business contract." "Everything is a business contract, Olivia. I thought you understood that." He turned and walked over to a small hidden safe behind a Rothko painting. He spun the dial and the heavy door clicked open. He removed a checkbook and a thick document. He strode back to her and placed them on the counter. "This is a severance, $5 million. It's more than the prenup dictates for a dissolution at this stage, but I'm feeling generous. The document is an NDA. You will sign it, you will leave, and you will not contact me or any of my associates again. You will handle your situation quietly and discreetly." The nausea returned with a vengeance, but it was no longer from the pregnancy. It was the sickening realization of what her entire marriage had been. She was a line item on a balance sheet, and now she was being written off. "You're throwing me away," she whispered, the enormity of his cruelty washing over her. "You're throwing us away." "I'm protecting my life's work," he said, his voice as cold as the polished marble beneath her hands. "The empire comes first. It always has. I can't have a screaming baby and a sentimental wife derailing the biggest deal of my career. Victoria Croft is looking for any weakness to exploit. I will not give her one." He picked up his glass of scotch, his composure absolute. "The doorman will help you with your bags. I'd like you to be gone within the hour." He turned and walked toward his home office, the glass door sliding shut behind him, sealing her out of his world as cleanly and efficiently as he had just severed their life together. Olivia stood alone in the vast, silent penthouse, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The glittering city below no longer looked like a kingdom. It looked like a cold, indifferent abyss. The hour Jonathan gave her felt both like an eternity and an instant. Olivia moved through the palatial apartment in a daze, the shock so profound it was like a physical anesthetic numbing her to the bone. The objects around her, once symbols of a life of unbelievable privilege, now seemed like props on a stage set for a play whose run had abruptly ended. The Bottega Veneta handbag on the hall table, the diamond earrings from their 2nd anniversary, the first edition book of poetry he'd given her during their whirlwind courtship. They were all meaningless artifacts from a life that was a lie. She packed a single suitcase, practical things, a few changes of clothes, toiletries, the worn paperback she kept by her bed. She couldn't bring herself to touch the designer gowns or the expensive jewelry. They felt tainted the price of her own naivety. As she zipped the bag, her eyes fell on a small, leather-bound journal on Jonathan's nightstand. It wasn't his personal diary. He wasn't a man given to introspection. It was his idea journal, a place where he scribbled notes, figures, and fragmented thoughts about business strategies. On an impulse, she couldn't explain a flicker of defiance in the fog of her grief. She slipped it into her handbag. The check for $5 million lay on the counter next to the thick, terrifying pages of the non-disclosure agreement. Her hands trembled as she picked up the pen. Signing it felt like erasing herself, agreeing that the last 3 years had been a transaction, not a marriage. But what choice did she have? She was pregnant alone and facing a man who wielded lawyers like weapons. A fight would be financial and emotional suicide. She scrawled her name, the ink bleeding slightly as a single tear fell onto the page. She left the check on the counter. Taking his money felt like agreeing with his valuation of her and their unborn child. She would not be bought off. The doorman, a kind-faced man named George, who had always greeted her with a warm smile, looked at her with pity in his eyes as he hailed a cab. He didn't ask any questions as he loaded her lone suitcase into the trunk. As the yellow cab pulled away from the curb, Olivia looked back at the gleaming tower of 157, a modern-day fortress where she had been a willing prisoner. She didn't cry. The numbness held a fragile shell around her shattered heart. She had nowhere to go. Her parents had passed away years ago, and her only living relative was an aunt in Ohio she hadn't spoken to in years. Her old friends, the ones from her art world days, had drifted away, intimidated by her new life, or simply unable to find a foothold in the hermetically sealed world of Jonathan Westwood. There was only one person she could think of: Chloe Bennett. Chloe had been her best friend in college. A fiercely intelligent, take-no-prisoners woman who had gone on to law school while Olivia pursued art history. Their friendship had strained under the weight of Olivia's marriage. Chloe had never trusted Jonathan. She'd called him a beautifully packaged sociopath after their first and only dinner together. Olivia, blinded by love, had been offended. They hadn't spoken in nearly a year. Swallowing her pride, Olivia pulled out her phone and found Chloe's number. It rang 4 times, and she was about to hang up when a sharp, familiar voice answered. "Olivia, is that you?" The sound of Chloe's voice, so full of life and unvarnished honesty, broke the dam. A sob escaped Olivia's lips. "Chloe," she choked out, "I need help." An hour later, Olivia was sitting in a cozy, cluttered apartment in Brooklyn that smelled of old books and fresh coffee. Chloe, her fiery red hair pulled back in a messy bun, placed a steaming mug of tea in Olivia's hands and wrapped a thick quilt around her shoulders. She listened without interruption as Olivia recounted the entire nightmarish evening, her voice breaking as she described the cold, calculating look in Jonathan's eyes. When Olivia finished her voice a raw whisper, Chloe didn't offer platitudes. She was furious. "That son of a bitch," she hissed, her green eyes flashing. "He didn't just fire you, he liquidated you. I knew he was a snake, but I didn't realize he was a venomous one." Chloe stood up and began to pace her small living room, a predator stalking its prey. "Okay, first things first. You are staying here. No arguments. Second, we are going to see a doctor tomorrow to confirm everything and make sure you and the baby are healthy. Third," she paused and looked at the unsigned NDA Olivia had instinctively brought with her. "You didn't sign the copy you took, did you?" "I signed the one I left for him," Olivia mumbled. "And I left the check." "Good," Chloe said with a grim smile. "Leaving the check is a powerful statement. It means you rejected the settlement. It weakens the enforceability of the NDA under duress. It's not a silver bullet, but it's a start." Chloe was no longer just a friend. She was a lawyer, and her mind was already mapping out a strategy. He's terrified of Victoria Croft. That's the key. He sees you and the baby as a vulnerability she can exploit in this Kestrel deal. He's not just being cruel, he's being strategic. Men like Jonathan don't have emotions. They have assets and liabilities. He just reclassified you. The clinical coldness of Chloe's analysis mirrored Jonathan's, but where his had been an act of cruelty, hers was a tool for survival. It helped Olivia to see the situation not as a personal failure, but as a corporate maneuver. It didn't lessen the pain, but it clarified the enemy. "What can I do, Chloe?" Olivia asked, feeling utterly helpless. He's Jonathan Westwood. He has an army of lawyers. I have you. Sometimes one good soldier is all you need, Chloe said, her confidence a lifeline. We're not going to sue for divorce right now. We're not going to make a scene. That's what he expects. We are going to be silent. We are going to let him think he solved his problem. He's arrogant. He'll assume you took the money and crawled away to disappear. His hubris is his greatest weakness, and we are going to use it against him. For the first time that night, a tiny spark of something other than despair ignited within Olivia. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something harder, something forged in the fires of betrayal. It was resolve. He called his child a liability. Olivia said, her voice quiet but steady. Her hand went to her still flat stomach, a protective primal gesture. He's wrong. This baby is not a liability. This baby is all I have left. Chloe stopped pacing and put her hands on Olivia's shoulders, looking her directly in the eye. No, Liv. This baby isn't all you have left. You have you. The smart, passionate, resilient woman who was there long before Jonathan Westwood ever laid eyes on you. He didn't see her. He just saw a pretty acquisition, his mistake. That night, curled on Chloe's sofa bed, Olivia felt the first stirrings of her baby, a faint, butterfly-like flutter. It was a tiny message from a future she couldn't yet see, a quiet promise that she wasn't alone. In the heart of Brooklyn, miles away from the cold silence of the penthouse, a different kind of life was beginning. Jonathan had severed their ties, but in doing so he had unwittingly cut her loose from the cage. He had no idea he had just unleashed the one person who knew, however vaguely, where the cracks in his empire were hidden. The first few months were a blur of survival. Morning sickness was a constant unwelcome companion, and the emotional whiplash of her new reality was exhausting. One moment she would be consumed by a rage so potent it left her breathless. The next she would be sideswiped by a wave of grief so profound she could barely get out of bed. Chloe's apartment, once a temporary refuge, became her home. The chaos of mismatched furniture, teetering stacks of legal briefs, and the constant presence of Chloe's grumpy cat Hobbs was a comforting antidote to the sterile perfection of her former life. Chloe was her rock. She made sure Olivia ate, dragged her to prenatal appointments, and patiently fielded Olivia's late-night calls filled with tears and fears. She was also a brilliant legal strategist. "We're in the intelligence-gathering phase," she'd say, scribbling on a whiteboard she'd set up in the living room. "Jonathan thinks you've vanished. The longer he believes that, the more complacent he becomes." With her small savings from her pre-Jonathan life dwindling, Olivia knew she needed to find work. Her high-profile marriage had effectively blacklisted her from the major New York art galleries. Nobody wanted to risk offending Jonathan Westwood. So she turned to the one thing she had her knowledge. She started a small, anonymous art consultancy blog, writing under a pseudonym. She wrote about up-and-coming artists, analyzed auction trends, and offered advice on how to start a collection on a budget. To her surprise, it took off. Her writing was sharp, insightful, and unpretentious. Within a few months, she had a modest but steady stream of income from small commissions and online consultations. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was the first ember glowing in the ashes of her old life. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through the few belongings she'd brought with her, she came across the leather-bound journal she'd taken from Jonathan's nightstand. She'd completely forgotten about it. Hesitantly, she opened it. It was filled with his sharp, angular handwriting notes on profit margins, ruthless assessments of business rivals, and diagrams of corporate structures. It was a window into the mind of the man she had married, and it chilled her. Most of it was incomprehensible corporate jargon, But she paged through it anyway, a morbid curiosity compelling her forward. Near the back, she found a series of entries from about a year ago. They were different, less structured, more frantic. They were about something called Project Nightingale. There were scribbled notes, Nightingale data servers, off-grid untraceable. BC holds the key, legacy encryption, acoustic signature vulnerability, and a strange hand-drawn map of what looked like a remote plot of land in rural Pennsylvania. She remembered him mentioning it once very briefly. He'd been on the phone, pacing the penthouse late at night, his voice low and urgent. He'd said something about an insurance policy, a fail-safe. When she'd asked him about it later, he had dismissed it as a minor side project, a small tech startup he was funding. He'd called it a pet project, something to keep a brilliant but difficult programmer busy. BC, Olivia said aloud, the initials jogging a memory. Benjamin Carter. That was the programmer's name. Jonathan had complained about him constantly. He'd called him a purist, an idealist, someone who was more interested in elegant code than profit. Jonathan had acquired Carter's small data security company for a fraction of its worth, absorbed the technology, and then unceremoniously fired Carter himself a few months later, claiming he wasn't a team player. Olivia stared at the notes. Acoustic signature vulnerability. It meant nothing to her, but the tone of the entries was different from Jonathan's usual confident scrawl. There was an edge of something else there, anxiety, maybe even fear. This Project Nightingale was more than a pet project. It was something he needed to keep hidden. She showed the journal to Chloe that evening. Chloe's eyes trained to find the fine print and the hidden clauses lit up. "This is interesting," she said, tapping the page. Off-grid untraceable servers. Legacy encryption. He was building a black box, Liv. A place to hide data communications, maybe financials completely outside the purview of Westwood Global's official network. Why? Olivia asked. Leverage, blackmail, a place to hide illicit transactions. With a man like Jonathan, the possibilities are endless, Chloe mused. But this part is key. BC holds the key. Benjamin Carter, the man he screwed over. It means Jonathan might not have full control over his own secret system. It means there's a flaw in the fortress, and we need to find that flaw. A plan began to form, tentative and audacious. They needed to find Benjamin Carter. It wasn't easy. Carter had dropped off the grid after being fired from his own company. He had no social media presence, no updated professional profiles. It took Chloe 2 weeks of deep-diving calling on favors from old law school friends who worked in tech to find a possible lead. Carter was reportedly working on a small-scale independent project, living quietly in a small town in the Hudson Valley. "You should be the one to go," Chloe said. "If I show up a lawyer from Brooklyn, he'll clam up immediately. But you're Jonathan's ex-wife. You're a victim just like him. He might listen to you." A week later, Olivia, now 5 months pregnant, and with a noticeable bump, drove a rented sedan up the scenic Taconic Parkway. She found Benjamin Carter in a shared workshop space above a coffee shop. He was older than she expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes, a salt and pepper beard, and the weary posture of a man who had been defeated but not broken. He was instantly wary when she introduced herself. His face hardened at the mention of Jonathan's name. "If you're here on his behalf," he said, his voice flat, "you can leave." "I'm not," Olivia said quickly, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "He threw me out when I told him I was pregnant." The hardness in Carter's eyes softened slightly, replaced by a flicker of empathy. He looked at her stomach, then back at her face. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, his tone genuine. "But I'm not surprised. The man's a black hole in a suit. He consumes everything around him. What do you want from me?" Olivia took a deep breath and pulled the journal from her bag, opening it to the Project Nightingale pages. "I think you built this for him. I think it's important, and I think it might be his biggest weakness." Carter stared at the journal, his expression unreadable. He reached out and gently took it from her, his fingers tracing Jonathan's handwriting. A long silence fell between them, broken only by the hum of a 3D printer in the corner. "Nightingale," he finally said, a sad, bitter smile on his lips. He always did love a dramatic name. It wasn't a fail-safe Mrs. Westwood. Olivia. It was a weapon. He explained that Nightingale was a highly sophisticated communication system designed to be completely untraceable. Its primary function was to intercept and decrypt competitor communications using a revolutionary algorithm he had designed. It was massively illegal and monstrously effective. He used it to get the upper hand in negotiations to anticipate market moves, Carter said, his voice laced with disgust. "He stole my life's work and turned it into a corporate espionage tool. I built a shield, and he used it as a sword." "The journal mentions you hold the key," Olivia prompted gently. "And an acoustic signature vulnerability." A real smile touched Carter's lips for the first time. He never did understand the artistry of it. He just wanted the results. "The system has a backdoor and override I built in that only I can access. And the vulnerability. That's the beautiful part. The servers have a unique physical resonance, a sound they make when processing data at high capacity. If you can record that sound, that acoustic signature, you can use it as a key to bypass the primary encryption. It's a lock that can only be picked by its own sound." He looked at Olivia, and for the first time she saw a spark of the fire Jonathan must have tried so hard to extinguish. "He's using Nightingale for the Kestrel deal, isn't he? And he's working with Victoria Croft." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Olivia whispered. Benjamin Carter closed the journal and handed it back to her. "Jonathan Westwood ruined my company and my reputation. He threw me out like a piece of trash, and he did the same to you and your unborn child." He met her gaze, his kind eyes now hard with purpose. "I think it's time his weapon backfired." While Olivia was forging an unlikely alliance in the Hudson Valley, Jonathan Westwood was at the apex of his world. From his new headquarters, a sleek minimalist office on the top floor of the World Trade Center, he orchestrated the final brutal stages of the Kestrel Technologies acquisition. His severance of Olivia had been in his mind a necessary and flawlessly executed bit of risk management. He had excised the liability, cauterized the wound, and hadn't given her a second thought. He assumed she had taken the $5 million and disappeared just as he had instructed. His world was one of forward momentum. The past was an irrelevance. His new life was personified by Victoria Croft. She was his equal in ambition and his superior in ruthlessness. Where Jonathan still maintained a veneer of charm, Victoria was unapologetically predatory. She was sharp, elegant, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. Theirs was not a relationship of affection, but of mutual high-stakes utility. They were two sharks, circling the same prey, having decided it was more efficient to hunt together. Their public appearances were a masterclass in power couple branding. They were photographed at exclusive Davos panels, featured on the cover of Forbes under the headline, "Titans in Tandem." And their combined net worth was a subject of breathless speculation in the financial press. Victoria had what Jonathan craved above all else, an unassailable position. She had inherited her father's empire and had doubled its value in a decade. She had old money, old power, and none of the insecurities that secretly gnawed at the self-made Jonathan. For him, their partnership was the final validation. "The Kestrel board is capitulating," Victoria said, not looking up from her tablet as they shared a helicopter back to Manhattan from a meeting in Connecticut. The city lights were a diamond dust carpet below them. "Your little Nightingale asset gave us the leverage we needed." Jonathan allowed himself a thin, satisfied smile. "It always delivers." Knowing their absolute bottom line before we even entered the room was enormous. Advantageous. "It's also monumentally illegal, Jonathan," Victoria said, her tone casual, as if discussing the weather. "If anyone ever found out about your little spy machine, the SEC would crucify us. We'd both be facing prison time." "They won't," Jonathan said with absolute certainty. "It's a ghost. The hardware is in a secure off-grid location. The software is my own proprietary design. There is no trail." He conveniently omitted the role of Benjamin Carter. In Jonathan's version of history, he alone was the architect of Nightingale. Carter was a mere coder, a hired hand who had been paid and dismissed. The idea that Carter might have retained any control or knowledge was beneath his consideration. Hubris was Jonathan's blind spot, a vast and dangerous darkness in his field of vision. "Good," Victoria said, finally looking at him. Her eyes were a pale, piercing blue. "Because once the Kestrel deal is finalized, we will be decommissioning your pet project. Permanently. All data wiped, all hardware melted down. I will not have that kind of liability attached to my family's name." A flicker of resentment passed through Jonathan. Nightingale was his masterpiece, the secret weapon that had guaranteed his meteoric rise. But he knew better than to argue with Victoria. The Kestrel acquisition was the prize. Once it was his, he would be untouchable. He could rebuild Nightingale later, better and more secure than before. "Of course," he agreed smoothly. "It will have served its purpose." His life was a meticulously curated series of wins. He had the business deal of a lifetime, on the verge of closing. He had the ultimate power partner in Victoria. He had purged the single emotional, unpredictable element, Olivia, from his life. He was an architect who had designed his world to perfection, eliminating any structural weaknesses. What he didn't know was that hundreds of miles away, the woman he had dismissed as sentimental and weak was meeting with the ghost he believed he had exorcised. The structural weakness wasn't in his business plan. It was in his character. The final push for the Kestrel deal was all-consuming. Jonathan and Victoria worked around the clock with their teams of bankers and lawyers. They were in the final stages of due diligence, a period where both companies opened their books to one another under strict legal protocols. It was a dance of transparency. But Jonathan, thanks to Nightingale, knew it was a farce. He had already seen Kestrel's unedited books. He knew they were hiding a pending patent lawsuit that could cost them hundreds of millions. He planned to use this information at the last possible second to force a renegotiation of the price in his favor, a final brutal checkmate. He felt invincible. One evening, standing on the balcony of Victoria's Park Avenue triplex, a glass of champagne in his hand, he looked out over the city that was his domain. He had achieved everything he had ever set out to do. He had crushed his rivals, bent the world to his will, and was on the cusp of creating a legacy that would last for generations. He thought for a fleeting moment of Olivia. He pictured her in some quiet suburban life, raising a child he would never know. He felt not a pang of guilt, but a surge of relief. He had made the right choice. Emotion was a fatal flaw in the world he inhabited. He had successfully amputated his. He raised his glass to the city. To the empire, he toasted to himself, the architect of his own grand design. He was completely unaware that the foundations of that empire were already being systematically dismantled by the very people he had deemed irrelevant. He believed he was building a monument, but he was standing at the epicenter of his own ruin, oblivious to the tremors just beneath his feet. Benjamin Carter was a man transformed. The weary resignation Olivia had first seen in him had been burned away, replaced by a quiet, intense focus. The artist was ready to unmake his monstrous creation. "The plan has to be surgical," he explained to Olivia and Chloe in the makeshift command center of Chloe's living room, the whiteboard now covered in complex diagrams and timelines. "We can't just hack in and leak everything. Jonathan would lock it down and the data would be too dense for anyone to understand quickly. It would get lost in the noise. We need to create a narrative." The plan they devised was brilliant in its subtlety. It wasn't a frontal assault, it was a whisper campaign. Their first target was the hidden patent lawsuit within Kestrel Technologies. Using the acoustic signature, a sound file Benjamin had recorded during the system's final diagnostic, which he had saved on a long-forgotten thumb drive, he was able to gain a temporary untraceable entry into the Nightingale system. It was a digital ghost slipping through the walls of Jonathan's fortress. He didn't download gigabytes of data. He downloaded one thing, the single damning internal memo from Kestrel's legal team advising their CEO to settle the lawsuit before it went public. It was the smoking gun. "Now what?" Olivia asked, her heart pounding as she watched the encrypted file appear on Benjamin's laptop. "Now we give it a voice," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. Chloe had a friend from law school, a man named Michael Chen, who was now a tenacious, underappreciated financial journalist for a niche but respected online publication. He was known for his deep dives into corporate malfeasance, but he was always struggling for the one big scoop that would make his career. Chloe met him for coffee in a noisy cafe in the financial district. She didn't reveal her sources. She simply slid a plain manila envelope across the table. "I have a source," she said, her voice low. "They believe Jonathan Westwood and Victoria Croft are engaging in unethical practices to force down the price of the Kestrel acquisition. The information in this envelope is a lead. It's unverified, but it's a hell of a place to start." Chen was skeptical but intrigued. The envelope contained a printed copy of the Kestrel memo. There was no digital trail. It was an old-fashioned leak. 2 days later, Chen's article was published. It was cautiously worded, framed as a series of questions. Is Kestrel Technologies hiding a multi-million-dollar lawsuit from its shareholders? The article didn't mention Jonathan or Nightingale. It didn't have to. It simply planted a seed of doubt. The stock market abhors uncertainty. Kestrel's stock dipped by 3%. It was a minor tremor, but it was a start. Their next move was more ambitious. Benjamin explained that Nightingale didn't just intercept data. It also stored all of Jonathan's secured communications. Jonathan used it as his personal black book, a place to communicate with his most sensitive sources and allies, confident that it was untraceable. Benjamin found a series of encrypted messages between Jonathan and a high-ranking official at the German Antitrust Regulatory Agency. In the messages, Jonathan was subtly promising the official a lucrative consulting position at a Westwood subsidiary after the Kestrel deal closed in exchange for the official's help in fast-tracking the merger's approval in the European Union. It was bribery, plain and simple. This time, the information went to a different kind of source. Olivia, using her anonymous art blog, wrote a long-form post, that on the surface was about the ethics of art acquisition. She wove a hypothetical story about a powerful collector who used undue influence to acquire a priceless work of art from a German museum, hinting at backroom deals and promised favors. She embedded keywords and phrases from the encrypted messages into the text. It was a digital breadcrumb trail, meaningless to the average reader, but a clear signal to anyone who might be looking. Then Chloe sent an anonymous tip to the European Commission's whistleblower portal, pointing them toward the blog post and suggesting they look closely at the communications of that specific German official. "We're not giving them the evidence," Benjamin explained to Olivia. "We're telling them where to dig. When they find it themselves, it's their discovery, not our leak. It's 1,000 times more credible." Weeks passed. Olivia's pregnancy advanced, her body changing daily. The baby's kicks were stronger now, a constant reminder of the future she was fighting for. She, Chloe, and Benjamin had become a strange little family, united by a common enemy. Benjamin would often cook for them, his quiet competence, a calming presence in the storm of their activities. He and Olivia would talk for hours, not about Jonathan, but about art technology and the future. A fragile bond was forming, built on a foundation of shared trauma and mutual respect. Meanwhile, the world Jonathan had so carefully constructed was beginning to show cracks. The Kestrel stock continued to slide as rumors about the lawsuit intensified. The EU's approval for the merger, once considered a sure thing, was suddenly and inexplicably delayed pending a procedural review. Jonathan was furious, pacing his office like a caged lion. He couldn't understand it. These were minor, isolated problems, but they were disrupting his perfect timeline. He ranted to Victoria about incompetence and bad luck, never once suspecting an external coordinated attack. His arrogance blinded him to the possibility that someone was outmaneuvering him. The final piece of the campaign was Olivia's own. Poring over the journal one night, she found a series of notes about a network of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. Jonathan used them for creative accounting, moving money to minimize his tax burden. But one of the account numbers looked familiar. With a jolt, she realized it was linked to a charitable foundation he had established in his father's name. He'd made a great public show of it, hosting a lavish gala every year. Benjamin confirmed her suspicions. Jonathan was funneling a portion of the foundation's donations into his offshore accounts. He was stealing from his own father's legacy. This was the most personal betrayal of all. This was the one that would destroy his public image, the carefully crafted persona of the hard-driving, but ultimately philanthropic titan. This whisper was aimed not at the regulators or the market, but at the court of public opinion. Chloe delivered the information to a gossip columnist at the New York Post, a woman known for her sharp tongue and utter lack of mercy. "A little bird told me," Chloe said over the phone, "that Jonathan Westwood's charity galas are more profitable for him than for the charity." The whispers were now coming from all directions. A tremor on the stock market. A bureaucratic delay in Brussels. A nasty rumor in the society pages. To Jonathan, they seemed like disconnected annoyances. He failed to see the pattern. He failed to see the invisible web being woven around him, each thread placed with precision, all of them leading back to a small apartment in Brooklyn. He was too busy planning his coronation to notice that the executioner was sharpening his blade. The collapse did not happen all at once. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, the result of the meticulous and patient campaign waged from Chloe's living room. The New York Post article landed first, a bombshell disguised as gossip. The headline was merciless: "Westwood's Wonderful Charity," or "Westwood's Personal Piggy Bank." It was filled with innuendo and suggestive questions, but it cited specific dates of financial transfers that were alarmingly accurate. The story was picked up by mainstream news outlets. Jonathan issued a furious denial, calling it a scurrilous attack, but the damage was done. His carefully polished public image was tarnished. The board of the foundation demanded an immediate independent audit. Simultaneously, the situation in Europe exploded. The German regulator Jonathan had attempted to bribe was suspended, and the European Commission launched a full-scale investigation into the Westwood Global Kestrel merger, citing suspicions of corrupt practices. The deal was not just delayed. It was now in jeopardy. This sent shockwaves through Wall Street. The Kestrel deal had been propped up by a mountain of leveraged debt, all of it contingent on a smooth and timely closing. With the EU investigation, the banks that had financed the deal grew nervous. They began calling in their markers. The carefully constructed financial architecture of the acquisition began to groan under the strain. Jonathan was in a state of controlled fury. He was surrounded by enemies real and imagined. He fired 2 of his top executives, accusing them of leaking information. He threatened to sue the New York Post into oblivion. He was a general whose army was in disarray, firing wildly into the shadows, unable to identify the source of the attack. The final fatal blow came from Victoria Croft. She was a survivor above all else. She saw that the ship was taking on water, and she had no intention of going down with it. She called an emergency press conference, standing before a forest of microphones, her expression one of cold resolve. She announced that her company was withdrawing from the Kestrel acquisition, effective immediately. We have recently been made aware of certain business practices by our partner Westwood Global that are incompatible with the standards of integrity and transparency that have defined my family's company for a century. She declared, her voice ringing with false sincerity. We will be cooperating fully with all regulatory investigations. It was a public execution. She didn't just abandon Jonathan. She threw him to the wolves. The market reaction was instantaneous and brutal. Westwood Global's stock went into freefall. Stripped of the Kestrel deal, the company was massively over-leveraged. Investors, spooked by the cascading scandals, dumped their shares. The empire that had taken Jonathan a lifetime to build was vaporizing in a matter of hours. In his office, Jonathan watched the stock ticker on his screen, the glowing red numbers tracking his descent into ruin. His phone rang incessantly. Furious board members, panicked bankers, reporters, hungry for a comment. He ignored them all. He was a statue, paralyzed by the sheer speed and totality of his downfall. He had planned for every contingency, every market fluctuation, every corporate maneuver. But he had never planned for this. He had never planned for an enemy. He couldn't see an attack that came from all sides at once. He was the architect of a magnificent skyscraper, now watching it crumble into dust because of a flaw in the foundation he had never known existed. Miles away in Brooklyn, Olivia felt a sharp, clenching pain in her lower back. She gasped, grabbing the edge of the kitchen table. She was only 36 weeks pregnant, a month away from her due date. "Liv." "What's wrong?" Benjamin asked, rushing to her side. I think it's time." She breathed another contraction, gripping her stronger this time. The stress, the adrenaline, the emotional roller coaster of the past few months had taken its toll. The baby was coming. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, immediately switched into action mode. "Okay, hospital bag is by the door. Ben, call a car. I'll call the doctor. We're ready for this, Liv. Deep breaths." As Benjamin helped a pale but determined Olivia out of the apartment, her water broke. Through the window of the car, speeding towards the hospital, She could see the news tickers in Times Square, all flashing the same story: Westwood Global collapses. Jonathan Westwood under investigation. His empire was dying, and her child was fighting to be born. The labor was long and difficult. For 18 hours, Olivia rode waves of unimaginable pain, her world shrinking to the rhythm of contractions and the encouraging voices of Chloe and Benjamin, who refused to leave her side. She pushed through the pain, channeling all the fear, anger, and grief of the past year into a raw, primal force. She was no longer the silent, ornamental wife. She was a mother, fighting to bring her child into the world. In the sterile, quiet environment of the hospital, the chaos of Wall Street felt a world away. There were no stock tickers here, no screaming headlines. There was only the steady rhythmic beep of the fetal heart monitor, a tiny persistent heartbeat, promising a new beginning. Just after dawn, as the first rays of sun touched the skyline of a city that had chewed her up and spit her out, Olivia gave one final monumental push. The sound that filled the room was not the crash of a falling empire, but the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing the crying, beautiful infant onto Olivia's chest. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she looked at her daughter. She had her mother's eyes and a tuft of dark hair. She was perfect. She was real. In that moment, Jonathan Westwood, Victoria Croft, and the entire glittering, corrupt world they inhabited ceased to exist. All that mattered was the tiny, warm weight in her arms. Benjamin. His own eyes, wet with tears, reached out and gently touched the baby's hand. Chloe was on the phone, her voice thick with emotion, telling her parents the news. A nurse bustled in, smiling. "Someone left this for you at the front desk." She handed Chloe a folded newspaper. Chloe unfolded it. The entire front page of the Wall Street Journal was dedicated to the story. A grainy photo showed Jonathan Westwood, his face ashen, being escorted from his office building by federal agents. The headline was simple and stark: "Empire of Ash." Chloe silently showed the paper to Olivia. Olivia looked from the picture of the ruined man, who was her daughter's father, to the innocent, perfect face of the child in her arms. One life was ending in disgrace and ruin. Another was just beginning in love and hope. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was simply balance. The first year of her daughter Grace's life was a beautiful, exhausting chaos, a world away from the sterile penthouse and the man who was now a cautionary tale. While Jonathan Westwood served a 20-year sentence, his name a synonym for corporate greed. Olivia's life bloomed. Her art consultancy flourished, providing a living she had built with her own hands on her own terms. She had refused to take a single penny of Jonathan's money, rejecting his valuation of their lives. Benjamin Carter became a constant, steady presence, his quiet love for both her and Grace a healing balm on the scars of her past. Their relationship grew slowly, rooted in shared trauma and mutual respect. One crisp autumn afternoon in Prospect Park, a little over a year after Grace was born, they watched the toddler chase a bright red ball across the grass. The scene was one of simple, profound peace. Benjamin turned to her, his expression earnest. "Olivia," he said, taking her hand, "I know your life is complicated, but I would be honored to be a part of it, if you'll have me." Olivia looked from her fearless, laughing daughter to the kind, honest man beside her. The tears in her eyes were not of sorrow, but of gratitude. The gilded cage was a half-forgotten nightmare. This was reality. This was the world she had fought for. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong, as she squeezed his hand. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Jonathan had called her child a liability. He couldn't have been more wrong. Grace wasn't a liability. She was a catalyst. She was the reason to fight, the reason to rebuild, and the dawn after the longest, darkest night. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured in stock prices or square footage, but in resilience, love, and the courage to rebuild from nothing. Jonathan Westwood, the architect of his own ruin, learned the hard way that integrity is the one asset you can't afford to lose, and that the people you cast aside can sometimes hold the keys to your downfall. What do you think? Was it karma, or was it a brilliant woman's quiet, calculated revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Olivia's journey from a penthouse prisoner to a triumphant mother, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear a story of empowerment, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of justice and resilience. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update on how the strongest empires are often built not of steel and glass, but of love and courage.